Judith Caldwell slid the envelope across the marble counter toward me with 2 fingers. The way you might push away something you didn't want touching your skin. Sign it, she said. Today, before this family embarrasses itself any further. I looked down at the word printed across the top in bold black letters. Divorce papers. Then up at Adrian, standing 3 feet behind his mother in his tuxedo, having said absolutely nothing since I'd walked into that room holding the small, carefully wrapped anniversary gift I'd spent weeks choosing for him. Adrian, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be, say something. He looked at me. I want you to understand exactly what I saw in his eyes in that moment, because it mattered enormously to everything that followed. Not hatred, not disgust, nothing nearly that simple. I saw a man who genuinely loved me, standing frozen, choosing his own comfort over defending me anyway. Mother, he finally said, barely above a whisper. Maybe we should talk about this privately. There's nothing to discuss, Judith said, not once looking away from me. I am not having a grandchild born to a woman who's let herself become an embarrassment to this family's name. Look at her, Adrian. Pregnant and doubled in size since your wedding day. Is this really the woman you want representing the Caldwell name at every gala for the rest of your life? I want you to sit with that sentence the way I had to sit with it, standing in my own dining room, 7 months pregnant, holding a gift for a husband who wouldn't even look at me directly anymore. My name is Olivia Marsh, and I stood in that marble dining room feeling an entire marriage collapse in the space of about 90 seconds, watching the man I loved choose silence over me, while his mother's cold, cruel eyes waited for me to simply pick up a pen. Before I tell you exactly what I decided to do in that room, because the next thing I said left both Judith and Adrian utterly speechless. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, the woman who walked out of that mansion that night was not the same woman who'd walked in. I picked up that pen. I had no idea, signing my name across that page, exactly how completely that single decision was about to reshape the rest of my life. Or exactly how many years it would take before Adrian Caldwell finally understood the full, devastating weight of what his silence had actually cost him. I want to take you back to the beginning, because understanding exactly how thoroughly Judith Caldwell had controlled her son's entire life matters enormously to understanding why he stood frozen in that dining room instead of defending me. I met Adrian at a charity gala 4 years before that dining room, working at the time as an event coordinator for the venue hosting it. He was warm in a way I hadn't expected from someone raised inside considerable wealth, genuinely curious about my own life and work rather than simply performing interest the way I'd occasionally experience from men in his social circle. I want to be honest that I fell for him slowly, cautiously, aware from the very beginning of the specific complexity that came with marrying into a family as controlling and image-conscious as the Caldwells. Adrian courted me for nearly a year before introducing me formally to his mother. A delay I understand now was less about timing and more about him quietly dreading exactly the reaction he knew she'd eventually have. I want to walk you through the specific mechanics of Judith's control over her son, because it wasn't simple, old-fashioned strictness. Adrian's father had passed when Adrian was 19, leaving Judith as sole controller of a family trust that governed not just Adrian's eventual inheritance, but his active position within Caldwell Industries, the manufacturing and real estate conglomerate the family had built over 3 generations. Adrian held an executive position at the company, but I learned over our years together that his actual authority remained considerably more limited than his title suggested, with Judith retaining final approval over nearly every major decision, both personal and professional, for as long as she remained majority trustee. I want to be honest that Adrian explained this arrangement to me early in our relationship, framing it as temporary, a structure that would naturally shift once he'd proven himself, sufficiently to his mother's satisfaction. A proof, I understand now, that never actually arrived no matter how much he sacrificed toward earning it. Judith's first reaction to meeting me was cold politeness, the specific, practiced civility of someone withholding genuine judgment, until she'd gathered sufficient ammunition. I want to walk you through the years of small, accumulating cruelty that followed our engagement. Comments about my clothing choices at family events, pointed suggestions about diet and exercise delivered under the guise of health concern, a specific insistence at every formal gathering that I be photographed only from angles she'd personally approved. I want to be honest about why I tolerated this for as long as I did. I loved Adrian genuinely, and I believed for years that his quiet apologies after each incident, delivered privately, never in front of his mother, represented real intention to eventually stand up for me more directly. I understand now that those private apologies without any accompanying public action were their own specific kind of betrayal, allowing him to maintain the appearance of loyalty to me while never actually risking his mother's approval to demonstrate it. I got pregnant roughly 8 months before that dining room confrontation. News Adrian and I had celebrated privately with real joy before ever telling his mother. I want to walk you through Judith's reaction once we finally shared the news, because it revealed exactly how thoroughly her cruelty was about to escalate. She offered congratulations that felt, even in the moment, hollow and performed, followed almost immediately by pointed comments about managing my figure throughout the pregnancy for the sake of the Caldwell name's public image. I had no idea, absorbing those early comments with the same weary tolerance I'd developed over years, exactly how much further Judith's cruelty was about to escalate as my pregnancy progressed, or exactly how completely Adrian's lifelong pattern of quiet avoidance was about to fail me at the exact moment I needed him most. I want to walk you through the specific months leading up to that dining room confrontation, because the gradual, accumulating cruelty of that period mattered enormously to understanding why Judith felt emboldened enough to demand a divorce so publicly and so suddenly. I want to give you concrete examples, because I think vague descriptions of this cruelty don't fully capture its accumulating weight. At 5 months pregnant, Judith suggested, in front of several dinner guests, that I consider a more structured meal plan, given how much weight I'd gained. A comment delivered with a smile that made the cruelty considerably harder for anyone else at the table to openly challenge. At 6 months, she canceled my attendance at a company gala without consulting me directly, informing Adrian instead that I wasn't quite ready to be photographed representing the family yet. I want to be honest about how devastating that specific exclusion felt. Understanding that my own mother-in-law had unilaterally decided my pregnant body made me unfit for public appearance beside my own husband. I want to walk you through exactly how Adrian responded during this period, because his specific pattern mattered enormously to understanding his eventual, devastating silence in that dining room. He would apologize to me privately, every single time, genuine hurt visible in his expression as he acknowledged how unfair his mother's comments were. "She's from a different generation," he'd say. "I'll talk to her." I want to be honest that I never once witnessed him actually confront Judith directly during this entire period. Whatever conversations he claimed to have with her apparently produced no visible change in her behavior, and I began to understand, with a growing dread I didn't yet have language for, that Adrian's private apologies functioned considerably more as emotional management for me than as any genuine attempt to change his mother's actual behavior. I learned, roughly 7 months into my pregnancy, through a conversation I overheard between Adrian and his own attorney, exactly how much was actually at financial stake for him in defying his mother directly. Judith retained the legal authority, as majority trustee, to restructure Adrian's inheritance and remove him from his executive position at Caldwell Industries entirely if she determined he'd acted in ways that damaged the family's reputation or interests, a provision apparently his own father had written into the trust decades earlier, giving Judith enormous, largely unchecked power over her son's entire adult life. I want you to understand what this meant practically. Adrian wasn't simply avoiding an uncomfortable confrontation with his mother out of emotional cowardice alone, though I believe that played a genuine role too. He was weighing, consciously or not, an entire lifetime of financial security and professional identity against defending me. And for reasons I still find difficult to fully forgive, he consistently chose the former. I want to walk you through the specific tension of those final weeks before that dining room confrontation, because Judith's cruelty had, by that point, become almost constant rather than occasional. She'd begun referring to me, even in my presence, in the third person during family conversations, discussing the situation with Adrian as though I weren't standing directly beside them. I had no idea, enduring those final weeks of escalating cruelty, exactly how completely Judith intended to force the issue to its absolute conclusion, or exactly how devastatingly little resistance Adrian was actually prepared to offer once she finally did. You already witnessed the core of that dining room confrontation. The envelope, Judith's cruel comparison of my pregnant body to my wedding day, Adrian's frozen, whispered suggestion that they talk about this privately. I want to walk you through the full exchange, because every detail of it mattered enormously to the decision I ultimately made. Adrian, I said again, feeling something in me shift from shock into a specific, clarifying anger. Your mother is asking me to sign divorce papers while I'm carrying your child. I need you to actually say something right now, not later, not privately. Right now. I want to walk you through his response, because it revealed, with devastating clarity, exactly the man I'd apparently spent 4 years failing to fully understand. Olivia, I love you, he said, his voice cracking slightly, but you have to understand the position I'm in. If I go against my mother on this, I could lose everything. My position at the company, my inheritance, everything my father built. I don't know how to just walk away from that. I want you to notice the specific word he used, everything. In a sentence discussing whether to defend his pregnant wife against his mother's public cruelty. I understood, hearing that word, exactly what Adrian actually valued more in that specific moment, regardless of whatever genuine love he also felt for me. Judith, sensing Adrian's hesitation working entirely in her favor, pressed further. This is exactly why I raised you to think practically, Adrian, she said. Love doesn't pay for the lifestyle you've grown accustomed to. Sign the papers, Olivia. We'll ensure you're financially comfortable. This doesn't need to be ugly. I want to be honest about what I felt hearing that specific offer, because it revealed exactly how thoroughly Judith had already planned this entire confrontation before I'd even walked into the room. She wasn't improvising cruelty in a moment of anger. She'd prepared documents, prepared a financial offer, prepared, apparently, for this exact confrontation days or weeks in advance. While I'd been carrying our child in complete ignorance of what was actually being planned around me, I want to walk you through exactly what I decided in that moment, because it surprised even me, given how genuinely devastated I felt standing there. I picked up the pen Judith had placed on the counter beside the envelope, and I signed my name across that document with a steadiness that came from somewhere I didn't fully understand until much later. I'll sign it, I said, sliding the paper back across the counter toward Judith, because I refused to raise my child in a household where their father chooses his mother's approval over defending their own family. But I want both of you to understand something clearly. I am not leaving broken. I am leaving because staying here, watching Adrian's silence every single time it mattered, would have taught my child exactly the wrong lesson about what love is actually supposed to look like. I want to walk you through the specific quality of silence that followed those words, because it carried a weight I hadn't expected. Judith, for the first time since I'd known her, seemed genuinely caught off guard, apparently having expected tears, pleading, some version of desperate resistance rather than the calm, deliberate clarity I actually offered instead. Adrian said nothing at all. I want to be honest that his continued silence, even in that final moment, told me everything I needed to understand about the decision I was making. I gathered my coat, left the small, carefully wrapped anniversary gift sitting untouched on the marble counter, and walked out of that mansion without looking back once. I had no idea, driving away from that house for the last time, exactly how much strength I was actually about to discover in myself over the following years, or exactly how completely Adrian's choice that night was going to haunt him, permanently, once he finally understood its full weight. I want to walk you through the years that followed, because the specific, unglamorous work of rebuilding an entire life alone, 7 months pregnant, mattered enormously to who I eventually became. I want to be honest about the divorce settlement itself, because it revealed something important about Adrian even in his weakness. He ensured, quietly, that I received a fair financial settlement despite his mother's clear preference for something considerably smaller. A small act of decency that didn't undo his larger failure, but one I want to acknowledge honestly rather than painting him as entirely without conscience. I used that settlement carefully, deliberately, to fund both my immediate needs as a new single mother, and eventually, the beginning of something I'd wanted to build for years but never had the capital or confidence to pursue independently. My own event planning company, drawing directly on the years of experience I'd built before ever meeting Adrian. I want to walk you through what those early years actually looked like, because I think it matters to understanding the genuine resilience required to build what I eventually built. I gave birth to my daughter, Maya, 3 weeks after that dining room confrontation, entirely without Adrian present, having made the decision, difficult but clear, that I didn't want him in that room after everything that had happened. I worked relentlessly during Maya's earliest years, building my event planning business one modest contract at a time, relying on a rotating patchwork of childcare help from my own mother and 2 close friends while I slowly built a client base and reputation entirely independent of the Caldwell name I'd once carried. I want to be honest about the specific pride I feel describing what that business eventually became, because it represents something I built entirely through my own effort, with no hidden inheritance or convenient windfall softening the climb. By Maya's 5th birthday, my company had grown into one of the most respected event planning firms in the region, handling weddings, corporate galas, and charity events for clients who valued my work entirely on its own merits. I want to walk you through a specific moment that mattered enormously to me during this period, roughly 4 years after that dining room confrontation. I was hired to plan a major charity gala, only to learn, once I'd already signed the contract, that the event was being hosted by Caldwell Industries itself. I want to be honest about the specific, complicated satisfaction I felt executing that event flawlessly, professionally, never once revealing to the event's other planners the personal history, connecting me to the family whose gala I was managing. I want to address Adrian's relationship with Maya honestly, because I don't want to suggest he was entirely absent from her life during these years. He visited periodically, always carefully scheduled around times when Judith wouldn't know, sending child support consistently, and I believe, genuinely trying to build some version of a relationship with his daughter within the narrow boundaries his own cowardice had created. I want to be honest that these visits always carried a specific melancholy, watching Adrian interact warmly with Maya while remaining, in every practical sense, unable to fully claim his own daughter within the world he still lived in, still governed by his mother's continued disapproval of the entire situation. I had no idea, watching Adrian's limited, careful presence in Maya's early childhood, exactly how much regret he was actually already carrying, or exactly how much more devastating that regret would eventually become, once his own health forced a reckoning he could no longer avoid. I want to walk you through what happened to Adrian over the following years, because understanding the specific trajectory of his own life mattered enormously to the story's eventual, difficult resolution. Adrian remained at Caldwell Industries throughout these years, eventually assuming full control of the company once Judith's health began declining roughly 3 years after our divorce. I learned, through mutual acquaintances who'd remained in touch with both of us, that Adrian never remarried, and never, as far as anyone could tell, built anything resembling the genuine partnership we'd once shared, before his mother's control had ultimately dismantled it. I want to be honest that I felt no particular satisfaction learning this, despite everything that had happened between us. I'd moved past active anger toward Adrian years earlier, replaced by a quieter, more settled understanding that his weakness, while genuinely damaging, had ultimately cost him considerably more than it had cost me in the end. Judith passed away roughly 6 years after that dining room confrontation, her health declining steadily over the preceding 2 years. I learned through Maya, who'd maintained periodic contact with her father during this period, that Adrian had been genuinely devastated by his mother's death, despite everything she'd cost him throughout his life. I want to walk you through something Maya told me, at 11 years old, following one of her visits with her father during this period, because it revealed exactly the reckoning Adrian had apparently begun undergoing. "Daddy said he wishes he'd been braver," she told me. "He said he lost the most important thing in his life, because he was too scared of losing everything else." Adrian was diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer roughly 18 months after his mother's death, a diagnosis that, given the specific severity described to Maya by his own doctors, offered a genuinely limited timeline. I want to be honest about the complicated grief I felt learning this news secondhand through our daughter. Old wounds and genuine sympathy for a man I'd once loved deeply colliding in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. I made the decision, once I understood the severity of Adrian's diagnosis, to allow Maya considerably more time with her father during his remaining months. Understanding that whatever complicated history existed between Adrian and myself shouldn't prevent our daughter from having the relationship with him she deserved during his final chapter. I had no idea, making that decision, exactly how much closure that final period would eventually provide, not just for Maya, but in ways I hadn't fully expected for myself as well. Maya arranged the visit herself, 11 years old but remarkably perceptive about exactly what both her parents still needed to say to each other before it became too late to say it at all. I want to be honest about my own hesitation accepting that visit, uncertain whether revisiting that old pain would provide genuine closure, or simply reopen wounds I'd worked hard to heal over the preceding years. I found Adrian considerably diminished from the man I'd once known, the specific physical toll of his illness visible in ways that genuinely startled me despite Maya's careful updates throughout his decline. He was sitting in a chair by a window, and I want to walk you through what he said once we were finally alone together, because it revealed a depth of genuine accountability I hadn't necessarily expected. "I've had a lot of time to think about that night," he said, his voice weaker than I remembered but carrying a specific, unmistakable sincerity. "I keep coming back to the exact moment you asked me to say something, and I didn't. I've spent 6 years understanding, more clearly every single year, exactly what that silence actually cost me. Not just you. Not just Maya growing up without me fully present. Myself. I chose money and position over the one thing that actually would have made any of it worth having." I want to be honest about what I felt hearing that, sitting across from a man I'd once loved deeply, now facing the genuine end of his life with a clarity his own mother's control had denied him for decades. I felt real, complicated grief, alongside something considerably more difficult to name. A kind of quiet, sad vindication in finally hearing him fully acknowledge what his silence had actually meant. Spoken too late to change anything that had already happened. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't mean something, hearing you say that now," I told him. "But I also need you to understand, Adrian, that I built an entire life without you, and it's a good life. I'm not sitting here needing this apology to feel complete. I think you need to hear yourself say it, for your own sake, more than I need to hear it for mine." I want to walk you through his response to that, because it revealed, even in his final months, real growth beyond the man who'd once stood frozen in that dining room. "You're right," he said quietly. "I think I needed to say it out loud before I ran out of time to say anything at all." Adrian passed 3 months later, Maya present alongside him during his final days, having built, in that short final stretch, considerably more genuine connection with her father than the careful, limited visits of her earlier childhood had ever allowed. I had no idea, sitting with Maya in the weeks following her father's funeral, exactly how much peace that final, honest conversation would eventually bring to both of us. Nor did I know exactly what I still needed to understand about my own journey through everything that had happened, from that dining room all the way to Adrian's final months. It's been just over a year now since Adrian's passing, and I want to give you an honest, full account of where things actually stand, rather than a tidier resolution than genuine grief and healing usually offer. Maya, now 12, has processed her father's death with a specific resilience I'm genuinely proud of. Though I want to be honest that grief doesn't move in a straight line for a child any more than it does for an adult. She keeps a photograph of the two of them, taken during those final months, on her nightstand, and she's spoken, more than once, about the specific gratitude she feels for that final stretch of genuine connection with him, brief as it ultimately was. My event planning company has continued growing steadily in the years since that dining room confrontation, now employing a small team of my own, and handling events considerably beyond what I ever imagined building when I first started, exhausted and determined, in the earliest months of Maya's infancy. I want to be honest about the specific pride I feel in this success, understanding that every piece of it was built entirely through my own resilience, without a single dollar or ounce of leverage from the Caldwell name I once carried. I've thought often over this past year about the specific weight of Adrian's final regret, and what it actually reveals about the cost of choosing comfort over courage at exactly the moment courage matters most. I don't believe Adrian was ever truly a cruel man. I believe, instead, that his lifelong pattern of avoiding his mother's disapproval, reinforced over decades of financial and emotional dependence, ultimately cost him considerably more than whatever inheritance or position he'd been so afraid to lose in the first place. If you've ever loved someone who chose their own comfort over defending you at the exact moment you needed them most, I want you to hear this clearly. Love without courage is not actually love in any way that matters when it counts. Adrian genuinely loved me. I believe that completely, even now. But love that stays silent in the face of cruelty, love that chooses inheritance and approval over standing beside the person it claims to cherish, ultimately costs everyone involved considerably more than whatever it was trying so carefully to protect. Judith Caldwell demanded I sign divorce papers in front of the husband who wouldn't defend me, certain that her cruelty would simply be absorbed the way it always had been. She had no idea, watching me sign that page and walk out of that mansion with my head held high, exactly how much stronger I would become without either of them. And Adrian had no idea, standing frozen in that exact moment, exactly how many years of quiet, permanent regret his silence was about to cost him, right up until the very end of his life.